Surely this exchange of expressions of interest over the weekend, if I can put it that way, must be tied into these negotiations going on in Washington.
I mean, I think they will be. I think, you know, it was the ZTE case clearly shows China that it is vulnerable to U.S. trade sanctions. The U.S. is now considering, in fact, there'll be hearings at the ITC this week, the International Trade Commission, about potentially another $50 or $60 billion in sanctions against China. So I think it is a wake-up call to the Chinese that they're vulnerable. I have to think it will factor into the talks this week, though, of course, the Chinese also have a lot of levers.
Ted, if we look at the difficulties that this administration has had agreeing some form of NAFTA deal, are we underestimating the difficulty that's going to be taken here in trying to agree something with China, particularly when we look at how different the negotiating stances of the two sides are, for all the optimism and the hearsay that we see over things like this?
Well, I mean, the markets may be underestimating the difficulty. I'm not underestimating the difficulty. The closest thing to this I've ever seen was the U.S.-Japan talks over autos and some other products in the early 90s. That took 2 years and ended inconclusively. The list with China is massive. And as we've seen from the NAFTA talks, which are under basically a hard end-of-the-week deadline if they're going to produce anything that will get through the Congress this year, those talks have been moving very slowly. The issues are tremendously difficult and contentious. So, no, this is far, far harder, I think, than most people recognize.
So, Mike, what can we glean from what President Trump has done already in the trade area about where this might head, and specifically South Korea? I think that may be the one trade deal they got done. And he came out and said, boy, we made huge changes in our deal, for example, the quotas on automobiles. But if you actually look underneath the hood, forgive the expression, they increased the quota, but they'd never been approaching the old quota.
Well, what we've seen out of Donald Trump so far is a lot of bark and very little bite, and it may be that he is just looking for something he can portray as a win. He concedes to the Chinese on ZTE and maybe gets this QUALCOMM deal through, and maybe the Chinese say we won't impose sanctions on a certain sector of the U.S. agriculture sector if we do go into some sort of sanctions tit for tat. So there may be something there that he can claim as a win, but it doesn't look like he's going to be following through on his really bellicose threats to bring China to heel. There's one difference between now and the Japan talks a couple of decades ago that Edward was just talking about, and that is that Japan needed us because we were their security umbrella. China doesn't feel that way. So it's going to be tougher to bring the Chinese into what the United States wants than it was with Japan.